Live from Secaucus, New Jersey, it's Carbo and Anthony's Be Terrific Selling Heroes. I'm here with Mike Carbonaro.
I'm talking to Roy Thomas.
The
inimitable.
Thank you. I can't pronounce that word. Thanks for joining us, Roy. It's a great pleasure to talk to you.
Sure. I'm glad to do so.
Without Roy, Marvel Comics would not be who they are today.
That's the story, right, Roy?
I couldn't quite hear what you said.
Well, Roy, Marvel Comics wouldn't be what it is today without you. That's what my
No doubt.
It wouldn't be what it is today without a whole mess of people.
Yeah, but we're giving credit where credit is due.
It would be different.
Okay.
You know, I mean, it would still exist without me. It would still be a big, probably just successful entity. But at the same time, you know, they benefited a little bit from things that I did, and I benefited a little more than a little bit from the things I did for them too. So it's been a fair trade.
Okay, so let's run down your credits a little bit. How many issues of Marvel Comics did you actually write?
I have no idea. I haven't. I haven't even begun to count them. There were 200 or 300 comics with just Conan.
Yeah,
Right.
with just Conan.
So
yeah,
so it's thousands plus.
I don't know. It's a couple of thousand or so.
There you go.
It's no record. I mean, compared to guys like Otto Binder and maybe Stan and Robert Kanigher and
but you did at one time hold the position of editor, and right? That's correct. Yes.
Well, usually I was an editor as well, at least for the first 15, 20 years. The first 15 years at Marvel and much of the time at DC during the next decade, I was an editor. I spent about 20 or so years in some sort of editorial capacity at both companies.
That's cool. So let's talk about, because this is a Star Wars theme this week and a new movie coming out and such.
Opening up tonight.
Yeah, it's opening up tonight.
Yeah.
The story of how you bringing in the Star Wars comic book helped save Marvel at the time. That's the story.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I didn't really have that in mind, nor did I know about it until years later when Jim Shooter wrote on a blog of his, maybe a decade ago now, that the success of Star Wars, those initial 6 or so issues, maybe the early issues.
First 6 issues were the movie ones.
That they, those were the movie ones, that those issues and maybe the continuation for a little while were a sort of a I didn't know it, but they were, I guess, a direly needed shot in the arm financially for Marvel at a time when evidently Jim Galton, who had come in and had been placed in as the new
CEO
president in I guess around 1975 or so. 75. He had been given supposedly a year or two mission to kind of turn Marvel around, or they were basically, I guess, going to sell it off for parts or something. And he was working at it, and he worked at it real hard. But one of the main things that seems to have helped, according to Jim, and hints I got even from him in a brief conversation a few years ago from Galton himself, is that the success of Star Wars, the enormous amount of money it brought in with all the reprinting and so forth back in 1977,
the reprints,
it really bought a lot of time for Marvel to turn itself around. It's not that Star Wars, saved Marvel forever, but it bought them a lot of time by giving a needed infusion of cash. And I think the best way to express this is what Jim Galton told a friend of mine who passed it on to me before I talked to Jim over the phone. A publisher friend of mine in Columbia, South Carolina, I published academic books. He was a college professor. Said he spoke with James Galton on a particular matter. He didn't know that, and when he found out that Galton had been the president of Marvel Comics until a few years earlier, he mentioned, I know someone who used to be editor-in-chief there and a writer there, Roy Thomas. And Galton said to him, oh, well, tell him hello for me. He made me rich.
Oh, wow.
Which means, of course, that, because obviously I never got rich from it. Neither did Howard Chaykin or anybody else at Marvel individually, but
Howard Chaykin being the artist who did the cover for #1.
Howard Chaykin, yeah, being the artist of those 6 issues
Right.
and so forth, the primary artist.
Did you script those for comics? Did you script them, or what would you call that if you were doing the
Yeah,
movie
I did,
adaptation?
Although Howard had a lot to do with the actual breaking down of the story, I sort of turned it over to him and said, just, here's the script. It was, there was no sense by writing out a synopsis for it too. Just, break it down into the 6 parts, sort of evenly divided. Howard knew how to do that. I'd worked with him before. If he needed to talk to me about anything, I was just a phone call away at most. So he sort of broke it down, and I just did the script. Yeah.
Okay, so
But
you
of course,
didn't
I was
really.
also the editor, so I could get any changes made I wanted. But Howard did such a good job. I didn't have any problem there.
You didn't really actually touch on like how the property came into Marvel and what you had to do with it.
I sort of working at it backward, I guess. The way
Okay.
the property came to Marvel was a little strange. We had been doing a few adaptations from time to time. There'd been 2 issues of a Sinbad movie that I had edited, and I think they had just started the Logan's Run. It was just starting to come out or about to come out or something.
Loved Logan's Run.
Yeah, but Marvel wasn't really interested that much, of course, in doing adaptations of movies because, there really wasn't a lot of money in it. I mean, you didn't own the property. You couldn't merchandise it later. All you could do was collect the money for the comics. And they were really more interested in developing their own characters because then they could merchandise them, to, I don't know, Slurpee cups or what, whatever, eventually to movies.
Slurpee cups are still around from the 70s.
Yeah, so basically what happened is that in, I had heard of, I had dinner with George Lucas through my friend Ed Summer, who owns the Super Snot Comics store.
Oh, cool.
I knew Ed Summer very well. He was one of the earliest comic book stores.
George was kind of a silent partner in his art business. So Ed and Lucas and I had dinner. Maybe Gary Kurtz, the producer, was there too.
Wow,
I don't
know
remember.
that.
It seemed like there was another person there. But of course, I didn't care if Lucas was there. I didn't care who else was there. Anyway, it was just a nice dinner, and we said complimentary things. I was a fan of his recent big hit, American Graffiti.
American Graffiti.
Which I liked very much. And he said some nice words about my writing of comics, especially, Conan, but different things.
George Lucas was a comic book fan, correct? Obviously, friends with...
Quite a bit, and as I said, he was a silent partner even in this comic art business with Ed. And he was quite a fan of that. He was,
Another great
liked,
comic book
Jenkins' work
influence.
also, I learned. And so that night, that would have been in early '75 probably.
Oh, wow.
Which is, about 2 years.
2 years, 77 was the comic,
yep. There wasn't even a full story yet. They had elements, but they weren't sure because they were talking that night about a movie that was going to be called The Star Wars. It has the word "the."
I love that.
And it was, it seemed kind of it seemed like the story wasn't really set yet. And later I discovered they had these various versions that where the original Han Solo was like a 7-foot or whatever amphibian, and things of that sort.
No way.
The hero was going to be this older guy named either Luke Skywalker or Luke Starkiller, and I think they might.
Right, Starkiller. Yeah, I've heard that bandied about.
That's about all I remember from there. I remember that the idea of the Starkiller and the fact that it was the Star Wars, but mostly, when they were talking about that, those 2 or 3 guys. I was just kind of a fly on the wall. I didn't really have much to contribute, so I was just kind of listening, and I kind of forgot about it afterward. Then comes that's not quite a year later, but 8-9 months later. So in February of '76, I got a call. By that time, I had stepped down, several months earlier as editor-in-chief, and I was under contract to Marvel to write and edit my own stuff, but that was it. I wasn't in charge of the company anymore as I had been through the middle of '74.
Oh,
and,
cool.
I got a call from Ed Summer, who, he lived across town, but his store was only a few blocks.
Where was his store? What was it, 79th and 2nd? Or?
Yeah, let's see, I lived on East 86th Street,
right.
1st and 2nd. He was a few stores down.
81st.
I thought it might have been in the low 80s.
Yeah, 81st. Yep.
Something like that. Yeah, just a few blocks
One of the
away.
earliest comic book stores in Manhattan, and one of the
It's
coolest.
a nice little store, and he and I had become friends. And once by that time, my wife and I had broken up for the last time, so I spent a little time. We used to go to movies occasionally, and I'd drop by the store occasionally. And we became a little closer simply because I had more time on my hands. And we always got along pretty well. He's a little younger than me, but he was, but we had similar tastes in certain things. Anyway, he called me up one day. I don't remember when, afternoon, I guess, and I believe the same day he said he wanted to bring by a friend of his, an associate of his, who was sort of George Lucas's, what he did, I don't know if he used the word media projects director, that was the official thing, but he was obviously a right-hand man for merchandising for George Lucas, and he'd like to talk to me about the movie and Marvel and everything. And I said, well, I'm not editor-in-chief, as Ed well knew, but I said, I'll listen. So we came up. I guess we had dinner or something before that. I mentioned later a spinny dinner. Maybe we told stories, whatever. But at some stage, we came back to my apartment, probably that very same night that Ed called, I think. And Ed didn't have that much to do with the pitch, but Charlie, Charlie Lippincott was the guy.
I've heard that name.
He'd been with, officially with Lucas for a few months, and he was in town, evidently primarily, about merchandising, and one of the reasons the particular timing was that there was a toy fair in town at that time. And he was going around there trying to make deals, for Star Wars, because, people weren't that interested in some science fiction picture. Last big science fiction picture had been 2001. That certainly wasn't a merchandising bonanza for anybody.
Right, and that was 10 years earlier, in
And that was quite
1968. Yeah.
almost a decade earlier.
Right.
So I was, so I really wasn't looking forward to the pitch, but at the same time, if somebody's going to tell you a story of a movie, well, I'd be probably going to see it sooner or later, and it's only polite. I was doing it as a favor to Ed. And Charlie was pleasant enough, so he comes in with his portfolio, and he starts doing this pitch. Ed may have said a couple of words, but it was mostly Charlie. And he's got all these Ralph McQuarrie drawings,
awesome.
or paintings. They call them production sketches, but of course they're really full paintings.
Yeah.
Ralph McQuarrie, one of the most amazing fantasy artists.
It really was the look of the movie. He obviously was very responsible for the look of the movie. And there must have been a dozen or 20 or so of these. They've been put out since then. It started with a scene of like Tatooine, and with its couple of moons, and then Charlie just begins to tell the story, but it's got all these weird names in it, so I wasn't really following it that close, or really probably even trying to. I was looking at the pictures and getting the general flow, and he's starting to talk about, he's got these. It still isn't decided, I don't think, quite at that time, between Luke Starkiller and Luke Skywalker. I think it was probably being decided over in Africa about that time. And then you had the robots R2-D2 and C-3PO, and and then there's Obi-Wan Kenobi, which sounded Japanese to me. I didn't know what that was. And then he starts, talking about this name and that name and Darth Vader and so forth, and, Princess Leia, and so forth. And some of this he has a little art on, and some of it not. But I was sort of getting the general idea. But, at the same time, it's science fiction. And the thing is, Marvel hasn't had, really the best of luck with straight science fiction. I mean, there are science fiction aspects to much of Marvel's, work. What isn't magic is science fiction on a low level, I suppose. Just like it's been
Doctor Strange comes closest, I guess, maybe.
Well, that's more like magic, yeah. But science fiction. I mean, Iron Man is sort of like science fiction, or Spider-Man is a weird sort of science fiction. But of course, it's low level, just like Superman was from the very beginning. But but at the same time, it's not science fiction in this sense with the stuff that Martin Goodman, the publisher, had always hated: rockets, ray guns, and robots. He didn't like those things.
Triple R's.
Now, he wasn't there anymore, of course. Stan Lee was the publisher now. Evidently, Charlie, I didn't quite understand it. I thought he had already talked to Stan. It turns out Charlie had tried to talk to Stan, but evidently he couldn't get past the secretary, so he decided, I guess, to try and end run around him, since he knew that Ed knew me, so he was going to try to use me to get to Stan, because he couldn't get to him any other way. And I wasn't really totally aware of this, but I was thinking he'd already been turned down. Either way, it didn't look like there was much I could do, and I wasn't that inclined to try, because I got my own stuff. I'm doing the Conan books and a couple of other things. I had plenty of stuff to do, and so it wasn't my job to find properties for Marvel anymore. I'd given that up when I stopped being editor-in-chief, and just about that same time, I had a chance to come back a second time to become editor-in-chief after a year and a half out. But I accepted, but then I decided to move to California instead. So, I got other things on my mind at this stage besides finding comic books for Marvel. But as Charlie is turning over all these paintings or production.
The production drawings and the paintings.
Finally, he suddenly gets to one and that
struck a chord with you?
he calls he said, now this is what we call the cantina sequence. And he turns over the painting, which has since been reproduced many times, which shows a Han Solo who does not yet, of course, look like Harrison Ford, because it was done way before Harrison Ford was cast, facing a sort of an alien, and they're about to kind of slap leather like a scene out of a Western, only with ray guns and with a couple of aliens and stormtroopers standing around in this.
Star Wars is a space Western in so many ways.
Yeah, and at that stage, I suddenly said the equivalent of, okay, I get it now, I'll do it. And obviously they were a little surprised because, I hadn't been giving them that much encouragement.
So Han Solo was the turning point for you, this turn.
Well, the turning point for me, as I explained to them, was, I said before, I was thinking, that you were talking about science fiction, and that didn't have a great track record, especially hard science fiction, just, and so on. But I said, this isn't really that. This is barely even science fiction. This is really what I think of as space opera,
Oh, nice.
And it's not that always sells comics either. There's been a lot of space opera in comic books too. But at least we had a fighting chance with something like that. It's like a Western or a hero story with the colorful heroes, the villains, and not with a lot of realistic science fiction aspects in it. So I said, I like the idea of this particular character. I hadn't been that interested in Luke or Leia, or even Darth Vader. These sounded interesting from distance, I guess. But Han Solo, I can't say Chewbacca the Wookiee because that name was mentioned, but they didn't have a picture of him, I don't believe, at that time that I had seen. So, but Han Solo interested me because he reminded me of the kind of space opera heroes I had liked in Planet Comics I used to read.
Oh, yeah.
Planet Comics back in the late 40s and early 50s. And then they even had their pulp magazine, Planet Stories, which was older. And I, read a few of those too, and they didn't have continuing characters, but they had that same kind of, low-level science fiction feel. Let's hop on the rocket and fly over to Mars this afternoon. Kind of
Yeah,
thing.
it was more about the adventure and then the characters than the actual science.
And not a lot of worry about, you get to a space warp, you don't have to worry about all these realities and, rocket science.
Those Planet comics are some of the most amazing covers in all of comic books.
Yeah, they had some, and the stories usually weren't that much, but they had a lot of good elements, and I thought, well, this might be along those lines. There had been a character that I had actually tried to get Marvel to adapt, to license a few years earlier when Conan was a hit, called Northwest Smith. He was the creation of C.L. Moore, who was a very good science fiction and more fantasy writer. And it very much that same kind of thing. And I sort of, and I wasn't able to make a deal there because they wanted a lot of money for what was really an obscure character, and that didn't make any sense for us. I was just doing it kind of as a lark. But I thought this is the same kind of character, and maybe it'll be fun, so I'll at least talk to Stan. So I set up a meeting where Charlie came in and talked to Stan. I don't know exactly who else was there. I don't know if Galton was there. I think the circulation director, or whatever. But Stan was the main person because, he had to say yes, and before even Galton as president could say yes or no. And anyway, so Charlie has said that I guess I gave a little pitch at the beginning, just, a few words about it and enthusiasm. Then Charlie got up with a lot of more practical things and what the deal would be, which we'd already discussed. I mean, basically, Marvel was getting this basically free. If they reprinted it enough times, they'd eventually end up having to pay money. But just for this comic, but the basic thing was that they were looking for something that would be on sale not after the movie comes out or at the same time the movie comes out. They wanted something that was on sale before the movie came out, because they wanted something that would, they were using this as a promotional thing for the movie, not to make money of per se. They used it because they wanted to stir up maybe a few 100,000 people that might read that comic book might go out and see the movie, because who knew if people were going to go out and see a crazy science fiction movie, a year, which was not even going to come out for another year.
So the comic books were the vehicle by which George Lucas was trying to promote Star Wars in the first place.
Yeah, I think it was probably as much or more Charlie's idea than George's, but George was enthusiastic about it because of liking comics, and I think, and they already had decided both of them liked the idea of Howard Chaykin being the artist, and while he wasn't someone I would automatically have gone to, I might have gone to, say, Gil Kane or somebody, or maybe I could have gotten Sim or somebody, but I liked Howard's work. I'd worked with him on Solomon Kane stories and a few other things, and I knew he was a good choice. He had done that Cody Starbuck character and a couple of similar things like at DC.
I don't know that one.
And I knew
Cody Starbuck.
George and Charlie were aware of Iron Wolf and Cody Starbuck. There had been about 3 Iron Wolf stories that time, but only about 1 Cody Starbuck apparently. But it was that same kind of look and same kind of feel. Not science fiction, but just adventure science fiction rather than hard science fiction.
So more easily digestible than a 2001 or the most well-respected literature in science fiction at the time, Dune,
and
right?
Stan saw that, so and besides the price was right. The only problem was that I had decided that if I was going to be doing it, and we never discussed any other writer, I wanted ample space to do it. And if this is going to be a 2-hour movie, I felt we were going to need 100 or so pages minimum.
And here
to do
comes
it. So I
the
felt
6
like
page,
we really had 17 or 18
sequence
pages of
comic book
books that
story.
page. So I told Stan, and so with it, and I had told Charlie that we would. I wanted to do it in about half a dozen issues. I thought that was a nice number to do it in, and so it was kind of agreed, except that the circulation director really kept on my case during and after the meeting a couple of times about the issues. He kept trying to say, we can't, if you put out 6 of them, if the first 1 or 2 don't sell, we're going to be out there with half a dozen issues that we can't even cancel, and everything.
Wow.
That's great.
And so I mean, he was still complaining and grousing. I remember to Ed Summer when he dropped by the office, the circulation director was just right before the movie came out, saying we were going to take a bath, that Carbo was going to take a bath on, that's the phrase Ed passed on to me.
He took a bath full of money with that one.
Bath in money is what they did, like Uncle Scrooge, The circulation director was otherwise, Ed Shukin was his name, very bright guy and very good. He just made this one wrong call, which he later freely admitted to me was one of the worst calls he ever made in his life. And I said, well, it was just luck, really, that that was the thing that they came to me with. But anyway, so I insisted. I told him, I said, look, you can get somebody else to write it. Of course, they didn't want to do that because they had this idea that, George and Charlie especially wanted me to write it. I don't think they really cared. But they did like the idea of there being several issues. And I said, unless it's a 6-issue thing, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do some 1 or 2 issue, 30-page adaptation of this movie. I'm just not interested. It's more trouble than it's worth. And it won't do a good job, and I don't want to have a handle on it. And so we did it with the idea that at least a couple of issues or so had to come out. That was the contract. Had to come out before the movie debuted. Since the movie debuted at the end of May, we actually had, I guess, 3 issues out by the time, because I
Wow.
guess the first issue came out in March, the second in April, and the third is at the beginning of May. So the third issue, so half the series was out on sale before the movie came out. Now, whether it helped bring anybody out, I can't imagine that it particularly did. Maybe it did. The funny thing that I thought of a couple of years ago is this, that George and Charlie, these people really wanted, not 20th Century Fox, they didn't care about it, but George and Charlie really wanted the comic done as a merchandising or a promotional thing. As it turned out, I don't think it really had any importance to it at all. I think those crowds would have probably been there with or without the comic book, because obviously more people showed up in that first weekend than ever could have read the comic book. But at the same time, what's funny is that Marvel, which had not been very interested in doing the movie as an adaptation, it turned out to be very important to them. As I said, it may have saved them from cancellation or something.
Wow,
And
what a
it,
great
it
story.
ended up going to 107 issues.
What you would expect, each side, the side that cared about it didn't get that much or didn't hurt them, and Marvel, that didn't care about it, had a tremendous gain from it.
Wow.
Not me personally, but Jim Galton said he got rich, and Marvel made a lot of money. I did okay. They even paid me a couple of bucks once when I complained that I wasn't getting anything out of it.
You know, Roy, I was selling that comic book in 1977 when it was 30-cent cover price at the Phil Sewell comic book conventions. I was getting $1 for that. So it was a hot commodity right after it came out.
Oh, cool.
It was great.
What the price was really, what, 30 cents?
Yeah, 30 cents. Although there's a 35-cent edition that's worth like tens of thousands.
I guess the way they made their real money is when they went back and started reprinting those first few issues.
Yeah.
And then they did the tabloid. The only thing I learned about it was they did the 2 tabloids, and they did a paperback even. You know, I remember.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That was a paperback book that.
The Treasury edition, right?
I had to get Howard's and my name on the cover. They were only going to have George Lucas's and Stan's name on the cover of the paperback, and I went in and complained. I said, you know, Howard and I are the ones that really did the work. I said, you know, we want our names. I want our names on the cover. So they did that, and eventually they had the 2 big tabloids. Each one had 3 issues in it. And then they went and they put it out in one tabloid that had all 6. I believe the circulation director said to me later, he said that one didn't do as well. I guess they had, as he said, they had gone to the well maybe once too often there. But they still made a mint of money out of that stuff.
That's great.
Wow. Now, do you think that structuring that 6-issue story arc had any influence on what is today the graphic novel?
Yeah,
I mean, was that the
one of
first time?
I really don't know. I mean, it was a nice length, but other people, but you know, the Logan's Run, which started earlier, that had, I don't know how many, 5 or so issues. It was the same kind of thing.
It went to 7, I think.
The only difference is that Star Wars was important to Marvel, where Logan's Run really wasn't.
Oh, that's
I mean,
cool.
it wasn't a bad comic, but you know, it didn't really mean anything to Marvel's bottom line. It's weird because Logan's Run was a modest hit too, but it didn't sell a lot of comic books particularly.
It had no toys.
Star Wars sold a tremendous number, but who knows why, you know.
It
Wow,
had no
that's so
toys.
So it was Han Solo that turned the corner for you, and today is the Solo story day, so to speak. The new movie comes out.
I'm less enthusiastic about it, you know, without
Harrison Ford.
without Harrison Ford in it. But of course, he can't exactly play the young Han Solo. He was already 30 or so, I think, when he played him the first time.
Right, he was like 33, I believe, because he'd been.
Yeah, he's a little younger than me, but he was already in his 30s, and so you know he's. You know, and I had met him a couple of times, before the movie came out. And I haven't seen him since. I've just been once at George's and once at a little party.
Oh, cool.
And, you know, but it was nice. I got to really I liked, the thing I liked best about the movie was, as I had thought it might be, Han Solo and Chewbacca the Wookiee. And, and so when I had to continue the things, I was having trouble, you know, getting permission to do this or do that, you know, because suddenly the movie became a sacred cow, and suddenly it was hard to get, permission to do this or that with the comic book. So I managed to turn it into a Han Solo and Chewbacca comic for several issues, and that interested me. And then when the sacred cow aspects of the movie just kind of overwhelmed me to the point where I felt this comic book is not going to be fun anymore, because I'm going to have to get approval for everything I want to do, and they're going to say, well, we can't do this, we can't do that. So first time I had 1 or 2 little bits of problems, like when George Lucas didn't like my green rabbit I made up for the.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
That was in number 7, the rabbit.
I decided, listen, I just told him it's been fun. I'm finishing this little storyline, and then I'm gone, and it got turned over to Archie Goodwin, and I think I think he had a better feel, or he was more enthusiastic about it. I preferred to go back to Conan because Robert E. Howard was safely dead, and he wasn't going to give me any lip.
So you didn't get any of that corporate interference with those properties.
Right. Well, I had a good relationship with the literary agent for the Howard estate, Glenn Lord. And he was just, it wasn't like he was a big comics fan, but he was just interested in getting money for the estate and getting Howard a few more readers. A lot of people would go from the comic books to then buy,
the books
or whatever. So, and I could do sort of, I sort of had a vision of what I wanted to do with Conan. Glenn understood that, and he didn't have any great quarrel with it, and so I was just able to do it. And nobody else at Marvel, interfered. Stan didn't know anything about it. Nobody else could control me anyway, so I just did what I wanted to do, and Conan became a huge hit for Marvel by the last half of the 70s.
Right.
With
And the movie.
Star Wars, it was never going to be like that because I was just, I was immediately just the tail on the dog, and I was because I was asking Charlie Lippincott over the phone things like, can I, to carry on the story with issue number 7 on, can I do something with the romance between Luke and Leia? They said, no, you can't do anything like that, I said, well, can I use Darth Vader? No, can't use Darth Vader because we don't know what we'll be doing with him in the second movie yet.
Yeah, so you didn't know that Luke and Leia were brother and sister at the time, right? Yeah.
Told me that.
No.
And I mentioned something, I remember mentioning to them that there's a mention in the story of something called the Clone Wars.
Oh,
Can I
yeah.
do something with that? They said, no, we may want to do something with that someday.
30 years later,
They're
right?
still trying to work that one out. But
It shows that I recognized a good idea when I saw one, but I wasn't allowed to run with it. So I thought, this is going to be a king-size drag working on this comic book now as opposed to working on Conan. So I went back to Conan, and I dropped Star Wars with an audible thud. Archie picked it up and ran with it, had a good time, much better than I would have had. I'd have been miserable.
Wow.
What a great story.
I don't take well to being the junior member of a team unless it's Stan.
I still have a vision of you, George Lucas. You said Gary Kurtz and Ed Summer sitting at a dinner table way back 2 years before the movie came out, thinking about what you guys were doing in merchandising and a comic book about to be done.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Do you remember where you went to dinner, that restaurant, or where that was?
Oh, no, it was somewhere. I think it was somewhere on 2nd Avenue.
Okay.
A few blocks down, not far from it.
Right.
Somewhere down there and so forth. And, it was just some restaurant, and everything. And I'm just sitting there, with them and everything and enjoying myself. But at that time, of course, Charlie wasn't involved yet. So they really hadn't been thinking about doing a Star Wars comic book then. I don't think it was really on their minds at all.
Right.
That came up when Charlie got involved, and while he was involved in February of '76 for a few months, it was not until he got involved sometime later in '75 that the whole idea of the comic book came out. I don't think 20th Century Fox liked the idea of the comic book. They thought it was kind of a waste of time. Well, maybe it was, but it worked out well for Marvel, and it didn't hurt the Star Wars movie either,
Comics were not looked at as high art and pop culture as they are today.
Right, and the source material for other billion-dollar merchandising.
So I got to take off.
Okay, great.
Wow.
What a great story. We want to have you back when you're in town and at Mike's show specifically, and have you. We could talk to you for hours.
He's getting
Thank
on his
you, Roy.
spaceship and taking off.
Bye-bye.
Wow, how amazing is that?
That was incredible.
Wow.
What a great
I didn't
story.
know any of that stuff. I knew
That's
Ed
the
Summer.
inside stuff, man.
I knew Ed Summer really well at Super Snipe Comics.
Oh man, I remember he was the first guy to make a comic book out of his merchandising and his whole catalog. Remember? He would have Joe Kubert do a cover and all that stuff.
That's right.
Yeah, he made a comic book out of his merchandise.
There was also this poster that they gave away, this really cool the image of the first the cover for Star Wars #1, and it's worth thousands of dollars.
Oh, that's right. I actually had one of those. Luke, Luke Skywalker.
Starkiller.
Mark
Let's
Hamill.
start calling him Starkiller
No,
from
but I
now on.
had
I like
one.
that.
A guy sold me one.
Forget
It's
that
still in the
Skywalker stuff.
tube.
Yeah.
It was still in the tube. Luke, Mark Hamill was walking around San Diego Comic-Con that year saying, hey, I'm in a new sci-fi movie. Check this out.
That's
handing those out to people. And the guy had one that he had never opened.
And we never even talk about the influence of Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon.
Yeah,
that's
all.
so
That's
obvious
true.
in anything, in the original sci-fi comic
and
strip.
Dune. I mean, if you ever read Dune, no,
Yeah, I love
that
Dune,
was
but
like,
I think that's a little different than this.
that was too
that's
thick.
Real science
That
fiction.
was not digestible for the general popcorn eating market, and it still isn't today. Dune hasn't broken through, but there's a lot of influences that I think that George used from Dune in Star Wars.
There's actually a guest that I'd love to bring on. He's still around, a renowned director called Alejandro Jodorowsky, who did a movie called El Topo and Holy Mountain, but he also did a whole movie that had elements of Star Wars, elements of Alien, elements of Dune, and it was part of that. And at one point, he had taken it to all the studios, and they all rejected it, but years later, each of those ideas came out in separate films.
Right.
It's but he's somebody I want to bring on.
So we just want to sign off right now as a segment
It
for
was
our Roy
Han
Thomas
Solo
interview.
That started the Star Wars
Yeah,
comic
that
book, so to
influence
speak,
of Han
right?
Solo.
And here we are, Solo Day.
And the Ralph McQuarrie.
man.
We're going to have some Ralph McQuarrie material on the real
You're gonna
show
bring
today.
that? You're gonna get
I
that?
have
You got
some.
it. Great.
And
All right.
so we're going to cut this off right now and go so we can come back to our regularly scheduled show.
Live from Sea Caucus or on tape.
Yeah. previous week we recorded.
The solo day.
Yeah,
what a great
awesome.
story with Roy Thomas.
That was great.
Awesome. Nice.